December 7, 1941, the day the world changed forever. When Japanese aircraft roared over the skies of Pearl Harbor, unleashing fire and steel on unsuspecting sailors, America was forced into a war it could no longer avoid. The smoldering wrecks of the USS Arizona, the Oklahoma, and countless others stood as silent graves for more than 2,400 men. The attack was devastating, but what followed in the months after was even darker. America's unforgotten revenge. The mission that rose from the ashes of Pearl Harbor was no ordinary strike. It was a mission forged in rage, desperation, and sacrifice. Few believed it could succeed. The odds of survival were so low that men who volunteered for it knew they were stepping into death's embrace. They weren't just flying into combat. They were flying into legend. This was not a battle of equals. It was a gamble, a high-risk operation designed to prove that America's spirit could not be broken. But beneath the patriotic slogans and bold headlines lies a haunting truth. The price of revenge was written in blood, fire, and the silence of men who never returned. So the question remains, in avenging Pearl Harbor, did America strike a decisive blow, or did it unleash a curse that condemned those brave crews to a fate worse than death? The story begins in the smoke-choked aftermath of Pearl Harbor. Across the Pacific, America was humiliated. Its fleet shattered, its sailors buried beneath twisted steel, its military power questioned by both enemies and allies. President Franklin D. Roosevelt promised justice, but the question was how. How could America, still reeling from the attack, strike back at an enemy thousands of miles away? Enter the idea that would become one of the most daring missions of World War II, the Doolittle Raid. Conceived by General James H. Doolittle, it was audacious, almost insane. 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers would launch from the deck of an aircraft carrier, something never attempted before. They would strike directly at the Japanese home islands, hitting Tokyo and other major cities. The plan was simple in theory, but in practice it was near suicidal. The crews who volunteered were not ignorant of the risks. Most were in their early 20s, boys barely out of high school, yet already hardened by the reality of war. Some were married, fathers of infants they might never see again. They were told there was little chance of making it back alive. If they survived the bombing, they would have to crash land in China, hoping to evade capture by Japanese forces. Still, men stepped forward eagerly. To them, the mission wasn't just about destroying factories or military targets. It was about restoring America's honor. It was about sending a message to the Japanese Empire: you struck us in our home. Now we will strike you in yours. And yet the seeds of tragedy were already sown. The B-25s were too heavy for carrier decks, the fuel loads barely enough to reach China, and if the carrier was spotted, the entire operation would collapse before it even began. These young men weren't just signing up for a mission. They were walking into history, and possibly their own funerals. April 1942, the USS Hornet, carrying the 16 bombers, steamed across the Pacific, escorted by the carrier Enterprise and a fleet of warships. The men lived in cramped quarters, their planes lashed to the deck in plain view. Sailors stared in awe. Never before had bombers this large been placed on a carrier. Every man aboard knew this was something extraordinary, something desperate. The tension was electric. Each day brought them closer to Japanese waters. But on April 18th, disaster struck. A Japanese patrol vessel spotted the fleet. Although it was sunk immediately, the alarm had been raised. The mission was compromised. The crews were ordered to launch early, hundreds of miles before their intended point. That meant one thing: they would almost certainly run out of fuel before reaching safety. One by one, the B-25s roared off the deck, their engines straining as they clawed into the sky. Men on the carrier cheered as the bombers lifted into the air, but deep down, everyone knew. This was now a one-way trip. Over Tokyo, sirens wailed. Civilians and soldiers alike panicked as bombs rained down, striking industrial targets, oil tanks, and military facilities. It wasn't the physical damage that mattered most. It was the psychological shock. For the first time in centuries, the Japanese home islands had been attacked. The myth of invulnerability was shattered. But for the crews, the true horror was just beginning. As they turned westward, the fuel gauges told the grim story. One by one, bombers began running dry. Crews bailed out over Chinese countryside, crash-landed in rice paddies, or ditched into the sea. Many were rescued by Chinese civilians, but others weren't so lucky. 8 men were captured by the Japanese. They were tortured, beaten, and starved. Eventually, 3 were executed. Others languished in brutal prison camps for years, broken in body but not in spirit. Their families at home received little information. For many months, they didn't even know if their sons were alive. And yet, even in tragedy, there were moments of quiet heroism. Chinese villagers risked their lives to shelter downed airmen, knowing that discovery meant certain death at the hands of Japanese forces. Entire villages were wiped out in retaliation, burned to ash for their defiance. The Doolittle Raid was hailed in America as a triumph. Newspapers splashed bold headlines, "Tokyo bombed," "Pearl Harbor avenged." But the men who lived it knew another truth. This mission carried a curse. The odds had been stacked against them from the very beginning, and though history remembers the glory, the cost was far bloodier than the headlines admitted. The climax of this story is not the bombs falling over Tokyo, but the desperate fight for survival that followed. Imagine bailing out of your plane at night, the cold wind tearing at your clothes, darkness swallowing you whole. Below is unfamiliar terrain, enemy occupied and hostile. There is no guarantee of rescue. For many, there would be none. Lieutenant Robert Metter, one of the captured, endured months of torture before finally dying in captivity. His comrades Richard O. Joyce, Jacob DeShazer, and others were forced to endure starvation, solitary confinement, and psychological torment. DeShazer would later return home, haunted but transformed, carrying both scars and faith. The Japanese response was merciless. Thousands of Chinese civilians who had aided the Americans were massacred in brutal reprisals. It was a hidden cost of the raid, one that remains a dark stain on the legacy of this mission. For the surviving crews, the ordeal of escape was a nightmare. Some wandered for days, weak and starving, before encountering resistance fighters. Others faced Japanese patrols hunted like animals. Every hour was a gamble between life, capture, or death. And yet, despite everything, the mission achieved what it set out to do. It shook Japan's confidence and forced them to divert resources to homeland defense. But the price was staggering. The Doolittle Raiders became heroes, yet behind their medals lay the ghosts of comrades who never returned. The mission was America's revenge, but revenge always comes at a cost. The Doolittle Raid remains one of the most legendary missions of World War II, not because of the damage it inflicted, but because of what it represented. For a nation still grieving Pearl Harbor, it was a symbol of hope, proof that America could strike back. But beneath the legend lies a harsher truth. For the men who flew that day, life was never the same. Survivors carried physical and emotional scars for the rest of their lives. They returned as heroes, yes, but also as men haunted by nightmares, memories of comrades lost, and the faces of Chinese villagers who paid the ultimate price for helping them. In the larger scope of the war, the raid forced Japan to act recklessly. Stung by the humiliation of being bombed, Japanese leaders accelerated plans to expand their defensive perimeter. This led directly to the Battle of Midway, a turning point that shifted the balance of the Pacific War. In this way, the sacrifice of the Doolittle Raiders altered history itself. But the legacy is not just strategic. It is deeply human. The story of young men, many barely out of their teens, who stepped forward knowing they might never return. The story of Chinese civilians who chose to shelter strangers, only to face the wrath of an occupying army. The story of how revenge, no matter how righteous, always leaves scars that outlast the war. Today, the few surviving Doolittle Raiders are remembered with solemn honor. Their courage is celebrated, their sacrifice immortalized in books, films, and memorials. But perhaps the truest way to honor them is to remember not just the victory, but the cost. Because America's unforgotten dark revenge for Pearl Harbor was not clean, not glorious. It was written in blood, smoke, and silence. And maybe the haunting question we must all ask is this: was the price of revenge worth the souls who never returned?